Medieval peasants could sleep soundly through freezing winters while producing zero smoke. Yet modern campers, with all our technology, still wake up coughing and shivering. What did illiterate villagers understand about fire that our engineers completely missed? If you've ever tried camping without a lighter and failed miserably, you're in good company. Medieval folks didn't have the luxury of flicking their bick when the temperature dropped below freezing. They had to master fire or, well, become medieval popsicles. Back then, fire wasn't just about roasting marshmallows or looking cozy on Instagram. It was literally life or death. One bad winter could wipe out entire communities faster than you could say, "Where's the thermostat?" These people needed fires that would burn all night without turning their tiny huts into smoke chambers that would make a barbecue pit jealous. But here's where it gets interesting. Creating fire back then was like being a magician, except instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, you were pulling warmth out of wet wood and prayer. No matches, no gas, no calling the repair guy when things went wrong. The real challenge wasn't just starting a fire. Any caveman could rub two sticks together until his arms fell off. The trick was making it smokeless. Living in a small medieval hut with a smoky fire was like being trapped in a car with someone who ate too many beans. Except instead of rolling down windows, you risked freezing to death. Medieval communities treated fire knowledge like we treat our Wi-Fi passwords today. Top secret, passed down from parent to child like family recipes. Except these recipes kept you from becoming an icicle. Grandpa didn't just teach you how to fish, he taught you how to keep the fire going while you cooked that fish all night long without choking everyone in the process. Fire became more than just a tool. It was a symbol of life itself. Master the flame, and you were basically the neighborhood superhero. Mess it up, and you were the guy everyone avoided during winter planning meetings. The pressure was real. Well, the secret wasn't just one trick. It was a whole system that would make today's engineers jealous. These medieval fire masters figured out something that most modern campers still struggle with. They discovered how to arrange fuel, control airflow, and select materials in ways that created fires that burned clean and lasted until dawn. And the best part? They did it all with materials you could find lying around almost anywhere. No fancy equipment required. But before we dive into their genius wood stacking techniques, we need to understand where all this magic actually happened: the medieval hearth itself. Medieval hearths weren't just holes in the ground with some rocks around them. These things were architectural marvels that would make modern home designers jealous, and they didn't even have Pinterest to steal ideas from. The hearth sat right in the center of most medieval homes like a bossy mother-in-law. Everything revolved around it. But here's where it gets interesting. These weren't random piles of stones thrown together by someone having a bad day. Every single rock, every angle, every little detail was planned out with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Medieval builders knew something we've forgotten. They understood that stone doesn't just sit there looking pretty, it works for its living. These hearths used thick stone walls that soaked up heat like a sponge soaks up spilled wine. During the day, the stones would get blazing hot. Then at night, they'd slowly release that warmth for hours, turning the hearth into a medieval space heater that never needed an electrical outlet. But the real genius was in the airflow design. Think of it like this. Your lungs need air to work properly, right? Well, fires are basically the same. They're breathing creatures that need oxygen to survive. Medieval hearth builders created channels and gaps that let air flow underneath and around the fire. No fancy engineering degrees required, just generations of trial and error that would make modern HVAC technicians weep with envy. Archaeological digs keep revealing hearths that vary wildly from region to region. Mountain dwellers built theirs differently than coastal folks. Makes sense, right? If you're living where the wind howls like a banshee 6 months out of the year, you're going to build your hearth differently than someone living where the biggest weather concern is a light drizzle. Here's something that might surprise you. These hearths were social media before social media existed. Families gathered around them every single evening. No Netflix, no scrolling through phones, just real human conversation happening around a fire that actually knew how to behave itself. The smoke problem that plagued poorly built fires, these hearth designs solved it centuries before anyone invented the word ventilation. The stone construction and careful air channels meant smoke got directed where it needed to go instead of choking everyone in the room. Well, the hearth was just the foundation. The real magic happened when medieval firemakers started arranging their wood in ways that would revolutionize how flames actually burned. The difference between a smoky mess and a clean burning fire often came down to one simple thing: how you stacked your wood. Medieval folks figured this out the hard way, probably after countless nights of watery eyes and hacking coughs that would make a chain smoker jealous. Here's where it gets interesting. They discovered that wood arrangement wasn't just about throwing logs together like pickup sticks. The secret was creating what we now call engineered airflow, though they just called it not wanting to die from smoke poisoning. The crisscross method became their go-to technique. Picture building a tiny log cabin, but instead of walls, you're making air, highways. Each layer of wood sits perpendicular to the one below it. This creates gaps that let oxygen flow through like a medieval air conditioning system, except it actually worked. But wait, there's more to this ancient hack. The teepee arrangement worked wonders too, especially for getting fires started. You lean your kindling together like scouts around a campfire, creating a chimney effect that draws air up through the center. The flames climb naturally, and the whole thing burns from the inside out. Brilliant, right? Well, medieval people took this further than your average Boy Scout. They learned that the size of the gaps mattered enormously. Too tight, and you'd choke the fire like a helicopter parent. Too loose, and your heat would escape faster than gossip in a small village. The really clever part was how they combined both methods. Start with a teepee to get things going, then transition to crisscross layers for the long haul. This gave them the best of both worlds: quick ignition and sustained, clean burning. And here's something that would make modern environmentalists proud. This arrangement promoted complete combustion. When wood burns efficiently with plenty of oxygen, it produces mostly carbon dioxide and water vapor instead of thick, choking smoke. Medieval families stumbled onto carbon-neutral heating centuries before anyone knew what carbon footprints were. The technique was so effective that master craftsmen guarded their specific arrangements like trade secrets. Each family developed their own variations, passing down the perfect gap measurements and stacking patterns through generations. Some swore by alternating thick and thin pieces, others insisted on specific angles. These weren't just random discoveries either. Archaeological evidence shows that medieval hearths were designed with these stacking methods in mind, with built-in supports and carefully calculated dimensions. Of course, even the best wood arrangement meant nothing without the right fuel. The type of wood you chose could make or break your smokeless fire dreams, and medieval people had some surprising preferences that might shock you. When it came to fuel, medieval folks weren't just grabbing any old stick from the yard. They had their preferences, and for good reason. Think your grandfather is picky about his coffee beans? Medieval fire builders were like wine connoisseurs, except their choices meant the difference between a cozy night and waking up gasping for air. Oak was the king of woods, dense, reliable, and burned hotter than a political debate at Thanksgiving dinner. This hardwood could keep a fire going for hours without turning your home into a smoky mess. Ash wood came in second place, not because it was inferior, but because oak hogged all the spotlight. But here's where things get interesting. Medieval people weren't wasteful like we are today. When wood ran short, they got creative, really creative. Peat became their secret weapon in boggy regions. This dark, spongy stuff burns slower than a government bureaucracy processes paperwork. One chunk of dried peat could smolder all night, giving off steady heat with minimal smoke. The Irish and Scottish knew this trick better than anyone, and their ancestors probably chuckled at Southerners struggling with smoky pine logs. Then there's the fuel source nobody talks about in polite company: dried animal dung. Before you wrinkle your nose, understand this. Cow patties, when properly dried, burn surprisingly well. They're like nature's charcoal briquettes, except free and readily available if you owned livestock. Prairie settlers used buffalo chips for the same reason centuries later. Medieval cooks discovered another gold mine right in their kitchens. Fruit pits, nut shells, even corn cobs made excellent kindling. Applewood gave off a pleasant scent, while walnut shells burned hot and fast. Waste not, want not wasn't just a saying, it was survival. The real pros mixed their fuels strategically. Start with dry twigs and bark, add some hardwood for the main event, then toss in slower-burning materials to keep things going overnight. Like making a good stew, the secret was layering different ingredients for the best result. Smart fire builders also knew timing mattered. Green wood, absolute disaster. More smoke than a failed barbecue. But seasoned wood that had dried for at least a year, pure gold. They'd stack their winter fuel supply like precious treasure, protecting it from rain and snow. Well, having the right fuel was only half the battle. The medieval fire masters had another trick up their sleeves, special tools that turned ordinary wood piles into smoke-eating machines. Fire dogs and andirons weren't just fancy metalwork sitting in medieval hearths looking pretty. They were the unsung heroes of smokeless fires. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a good mattress foundation. You wouldn't throw your expensive mattress directly on the floor, would you? These clever contraptions lifted logs off the hearth floor, creating crucial airspace underneath. That gap became an oxygen highway, feeding fresh air directly to the flames from below. More oxygen meant better combustion, which meant less smoke choking everyone in the room. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval blacksmiths turned these practical tools into status symbols. The fancier your andirons, the more impressive your social standing. Some featured elaborate dragon heads, twisted spirals, or family crests. It was like having designer furniture, except this designer furniture kept your family from suffocating. The engineering behind them was surprisingly sophisticated. Fire dogs typically came in pairs, positioned parallel to each other. Logs rested horizontally across both supports, creating multiple air channels. Smart medieval folks discovered that spacing them correctly, about 18 to 24 inches apart, gave optimal airflow without logs rolling off. Well, here's something most people don't realize. These supports also prevented logs from touching wet or cold stone floors. Cold surfaces suck heat away faster than a teenager empties the refrigerator. By keeping wood elevated, fire dogs maintained consistent temperatures and prevented that annoying sizzling sound wet logs make. Medieval manuscripts actually mention decorative andirons as wedding gifts. Makes sense, right? Young couples needed functional hearth equipment, but parents wanted to give something beautiful too. 2 birds, 1 stone, or should I say 2 logs, 1 fire dog? The height mattered enormously. Too low, and you'd barely get any airflow benefit. Too high, and logs would roll around like bowling balls. Medieval metalworkers figured out the sweet spot, usually 4 to 6 inches, through generations of trial and error. And the weird part is how these simple tools created self-sustaining fires. Once positioned correctly, the elevated logs burned more evenly, creating consistent heat that lasted for hours. The improved combustion meant people used less fuel overall while getting better results. Some wealthy households owned multiple sets for different seasons. Lighter, decorative ones for mild weather, and heavy-duty versions for brutal winter nights. It was medieval fire engineering at its finest, but even the best fire dogs couldn't work miracles without proper technique. The real secret lay in understanding exactly how different materials burned together, which brings us to something medieval people knew that most modern folks have completely forgotten. Now here's where medieval folks got really clever. They figured out that fire wasn't just about the wood you threw in. It was about the air dancing around it. Think about it like this. Your fire is basically a hungry beast that needs to breathe. Feed it wrong, and it'll cough smoke all over your hut like your uncle after Thanksgiving dinner. But give it the right airflow, pure magic. Medieval people started experimenting with chimneys around the 12th century. Before that, well, let's just say living indoors was like camping with your head stuck in a barbecue pit. The first chimneys were crude, basically holes in the wall with some stones around them, but they worked better than anything people had tried before. Here's the brilliant part, though. These weren't just random holes. Medieval builders figured out that the size and placement mattered enormously. Too big and all your heat escaped faster than teenagers leaving chores. Too small and smoke backed up into your living space. Smart households also used simple wall vents near the floor. These brought in fresh air to feed the fire from below, while the chimney pulled smoke up and out. It's the same principle your modern fireplace uses, except they figured it out with nothing but trial and error. But wait, there's more ingenuity here. Some homes had adjustable shutters over these vents. When the wind picked up outside, they could control exactly how much air came in. Too much airflow made fires burn too fast, wasting precious fuel. Too little? Back to the smoke problem. The really clever folks learned to use their windows and doors like a conductor directing an orchestra. Open the right combination, and air would flow through the room in patterns that kept smoke moving exactly where they wanted it. Close everything wrong, and you'd smoke out your entire family. Medieval castles took this even further. Those massive stone walls weren't just for protection, they created natural air currents that helped manage fire airflow. The thick walls also retained heat so efficiently that a well-managed fire could warm a room for hours after the flames died down. And here's something that'll surprise you. Monks were absolute masters of this stuff. Living in stone monasteries, they had to be. They developed techniques so advanced that some of their methods influenced fireplace design for centuries afterward. All this airflow knowledge set them up perfectly for the next challenge, keeping those carefully managed flames burning strong all night long without anyone having to wake up and tend them. Keeping a fire burning all night without waking up every 2 hours to feed it more wood? That was basically the medieval equivalent of having a programmable thermostat, except instead of pressing buttons, you needed genuine skill. The secret wasn't throwing on massive logs like some medieval Paul Bunyan. Smart firekeepers used what they called banking, a technique so clever it makes modern space heaters look primitive. Here's how it worked. Before bed, they'd arrange their best hardwood logs in a tight formation, then carefully cover the entire fire with a layer of ash or sand. Sounds crazy, right? Like suffocating your fire with a blanket. But here's the genius part. Ash acts like a medieval slow cooker. It restricts oxygen just enough to keep embers glowing without flames shooting everywhere. Those buried coals would smolder for 8 to 10 hours, radiating steady heat while using minimal fuel. Medieval folks also discovered that certain woods were like the marathon runners of the fire world. Oak, hickory, and beech burned slow and steady, unlike pine or birch that blazed hot and died fast. They'd save their premium hardwood specifically for nighttime banking. Think of it as the difference between chugging an energy drink versus eating a proper meal. Then there's the positioning trick that would make modern engineers proud. They'd place their largest, densest logs at the bottom, creating what we'd now call a coal bed. Smaller pieces went on top, arranged so air could still circulate, but not enough to create roaring flames. It's like building a wooden apartment complex where everyone gets just enough oxygen to survive. But wait, there's more medieval cleverness. Many households kept what they called a mother log, a massive piece of hardwood that could smolder for days once properly established. These logs were often 2 feet thick and treated like family heirlooms. Some were passed down through generations, already seasoned to perfection. The really smart castle dwellers built special alcoves in their hearths called fire caves. These stone pockets reflected heat back into the room while protecting banked coals from drafts. Monasteries became particularly famous for their all-night fire techniques, since monks needed warmth for those early morning prayers. What's fascinating is how they'd test their banking job before sleeping. A properly banked fire should have almost no visible flame, but plenty of heat radiating from the ash layer. Too much flame meant wasted wood. Too little meant a cold morning. Of course, none of this nighttime fire wizardry would matter if you couldn't get the thing started properly in the first place. And medieval fire starting? Well, that's where the real secrets begin. Here's the thing about medieval fire secrets. Some were so good that families guarded them like nuclear launch codes. Well, minus the nuclear part, obviously. Monks had their own bag of tricks that would make modern campers weep with envy. They discovered that certain combinations of birch bark, pine resin, and even ground charcoal could create what they called eternal embers. These weren't actually eternal, that would be terrifying, but they could smolder for 12 to 14 hours without any attention. Makes sense, right? When you're waking up for midnight prayers, the last thing you want is fumbling around trying to restart a dead fire. But the real wizards were the blacksmiths. These guys figured out how to add iron filings and specific clay mixtures to their fires. The iron filings created tiny sparks that helped ignite unburned gases, while the clay acted like a slow-release heat source. It's basically medieval chemistry, except they called it fire wisdom, and probably had much cooler beards. Then there were the hunters and trappers who developed what we'd now call stealth fires. They mixed dried moss with animal fat and something they called night powder, likely ground minerals from local caves. These fires burned so clean you could barely see the flame, but they threw off heat like a medieval space heater, perfect for not alerting every bear within 5 miles to your location. The weird part is how these secrets traveled. Guild members passed techniques down through apprenticeships, but some knowledge leaked through marriage alliances and trade routes. A blacksmith's daughter marrying a merchant might carry fire secrets from one village to another, creating this underground network of flame mastery. Archaeological evidence suggests some medieval households had fire recipes carved into hearthstones or written on precious parchment. These weren't just ingredient lists. They included timing, weather conditions, and even moon phases. Apparently, humidity affected these techniques more than anyone realized at the time. Military commanders used smokeless fires for obvious reasons. Nothing ruins a surprise attack like a campfire sending up smoke signals visible from the next kingdom. Some castle records mention specialized fire sergeants whose only job was maintaining invisible flames during sieges. What's fascinating is how practical these methods remain today. Try mixing a bit of fine sawdust with your kindling or elevating your logs on metal supports. You'll get cleaner burns that last longer. These medieval fire masters understood combustion science centuries before anyone named it that. Their innovations didn't just warm homes, they shaped entire communities around the art of efficient fire.